at RSA 2019. It is so nice to meet you guys in person. Stu Sjouwerman, the CEO and founder of KnowBe4, and Kevin Mitnick, you're a household name, and now you're the Chief Hacking Officer at KnowBe4. So we're doing this conversation as part of Full Court Press, which is why we have the basketball. So basketball is a game of offense and defense.
That's right.
So just give the audience a little background about yourself, Stu, first, and playing defense for the cyber team. Yeah.
I build companies. This is my 5th startup. My last company, we built an antivirus product, and we saw that social engineering was a really big problem and nobody addressed it. So that's why I created KnowBe4 as a defensive measure, as an additional human firewall layer on top of all your other defenses.
So give me just a real quick summary of KnowBe4, what you guys do as far as security awareness, training, and strengthening that human factor and that human, quote, firewall, as you say. Because that's the defense.
Yes, it's a 3-step process. We do a phishing test. Generally, 25% of the people click. They get scared and they say, we need to do something about this. Step 2, training, on-demand, interactive training through the browser. Step 3, frequent simulated phishing attacks, straight in their inbox. And that keeps them on their toes with security top of mind.
And what is the incentive there for them to stay on top of mind?
The end user really in the training understands, wow, this is really important. Mm-hmm. It keeps the bad guys out of my network. And very often the first thing that comes out of their mouth is they say, how do I share this with my family?
Yeah.
So they understand how important it really is.
Kevin, a little bit about your background and being the Chief Hacking Officer for KnowBe4.
Sure, I have a unique background. I used to be on the other side of the fence as a hacker. I was never doing it for money or to cause harm. To me, it was about the thrill of the game. And what I learned long ago, that social engineering, manipulating people was actually over the phone, was an extremely effective way of getting into the system. I'd get into the system to pull pranks on friends and that sort of thing. And after I ended up getting into a lot of trouble for doing this hacking stuff, I was actually invited to speak at Congress. I warned them about the threat of social engineering and how that's going to grow and even be a threat to the country.
Sure.
This was in 2000. Mm-hmm. They didn't take it seriously. Fast forward to 2019, and now we all know what a threat it is. So I had the fantastic opportunity of partnering up with Stu, and now I help design courseware that the company uses to train individuals how to be aware of what the scam is, so they're not going to fall for it.
When did you both meet and decide to work together at KnowBe4, Stu?
Cute short story. My wife and I went and had dinner with new made friends in the neighborhood. I asked him, what do you do? He tells what he does. And they ask me, what do I do? Well, I keep the bad guys out of the networks. She says, well, my cousin Kevin went to jail for hacking. I said, not Kevin Mitnick. My mouth fell open.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I sent him an email and said, hey, do you want to partner? And don't take my word for it. He gets all kinds of emails from a lot of very weird people. So I said, check me out with your cousin Karen.
I'm legit. I'm related to your cousin now.
So he checked me out. She vouched for me, and here we are.
So cybersecurity, I've heard it be compared to a game of chess. I've heard it be compared to a cat and mouse game. Mm-hmm. I've heard it be compared to basketball. I also have heard that going on the offense is totally against the rules. So Kevin, what would you say to that? And then Stu, as far as the defense?
Well, it depends if you have permission. So back in the old days, I would hack into systems for the challenge without permission, absolutely illegal. But today, I get to do the same thing, hack into systems, but I have permission of my client, so it's perfectly okay. And I've been running a company that does this since 2003, and here we are, 2019. Yeah. And whenever a client would allow us to use social engineering in scope of penetration test, a security assessment, what we call a red teaming engagement, 100% success rate. Always got in hook, line, and sinker, because all we'd have to find is the one person inside the organization that would fall for the scam.
So it's just the human element, just one person, and then the whole company can be either ransomed or vulnerable.
Well, how it works is the bad guys get an initial foothold on the target's network through social engineering, normally through phishing these days. In the past, it's been a lot with pretext phone calls, but the true sophisticated attackers actually use a hybrid of both. And then once they get into the network, well, then they could use many other techniques to compromise internal systems, whether that's technical techniques or manipulating the human element. So usually that's the foot in the door. Today, most attacks start with an email.
So Stu, with that email attack, that phishing scam email, how important is it to make employees aware that this is going to happen to them at some point?
It's super important that you have this 8th layer that sits on top of your existing defenses. You have to go for something called defense in depth, and you absolutely need this human firewall as your last line of defense, because very often these phishing attacks make it through all the filters, and it's your employee who ultimately needs to be alert enough to not click on that link and click on the fish alert button to send that fishy email to incident response.
How much time would you say to a customer of yours is needed or allocated in order to effectively train somebody against this kind of attack?
An end user, I would say, is going to need a 30 to 45 minute training as an onboarding exercise. If you can't spend that kind of time, you can break it out in every month, maybe 5 minutes. And we see some customers do that. The smartest way to get this thing established is when you have a new employee that comes in, that's when you do the onboarding and the 45-minute training. And then you maintain their alertness, if you will.
So are these employees that you're training in a cybersecurity department, or are they all sorts of employees across the whole spectrum in a company?
That's the mailroom way up to the boardroom. That is everybody. If you want to defend your network, are you going to close half of the ports in your firewall and leave the other half open? So it's really, everybody needs to be trained.
Because it's only one, remember, the threat actor only has to find one person inside the organization that falls for the scam. That's the problem. So it's really important that you don't miss anybody for the training.
And Kevin, as part of KnowBe4, what percentage of your time is coming up with different things that can be simulated in these companies, these clients of KnowBe4 that are basically hacks, breaches, or attacks?
We talk about it all the time. I keep my ear to the ground, looking at the most recent threats, what's in the wild. How are companies being attacked? And immediately when I see something interesting, I talk to Stu about it. I email him and say, hey, are you aware of this?
Oh, okay.
And then of course, if it's something that we want to include as part of the training or in the product, it eventually gets there. Because we want to keep our clients advised what is the current threat? Because the threat actors are changing their tradecraft every day.
Sure.
They're looking for something new every day, so we have to keep up with them. So what we're doing is we're keeping pretty much on top of things so we could advise our clients and build that technology into our platform to help them mitigate the risk.
So Stu, how can one of your clients see the results of these tests, both the defensive, how well they're doing, and how many times they were attacked?
The attack side is, of course, there's bad guys trying to get in. That is not necessarily where we focus. Where we focus is we test them and we train them, and then we test and test and test. So we see if they fail the tests. And generally speaking, if you look at over a year, when you start and no one is trained, it is roughly 25% of employees that click on phishing links. If you start training them, after 90 days, it is already in half. So 13.
That's good help. Yeah, that's
and then in 12 months, it goes down to about 2%.
Okay.
And that's where this is the optimum. It's never zero. So you see a dramatic decrease of employees clicking. And that's where you want to be.
I hate to say it, but would you suggest some sort of punitive measures against those 2% who are still clicking on it? What's the best way to give an employee incentive to really learn this and not make that mistake?
Well, what generally works the best is you reinforce positive behavior. So that's what you do. As part of the whole KnowBe4 deployment, what we strongly recommend is you also issue a security policy. And in the security policy, it is clearly spelled out what happens when you click 10, 15, 20 times, because literally you are a liability to your organization. So after 5 times or 10 times, you have a chat with your manager, and then with HR, and then a written warning.
It's
and
that
then
serious.
It's that serious
It's that
because you
serious.
literally put your whole network at risk.
And also companies could look at what technologies they have, and if you have a more risky group, you could tune those technologies in such a way that they're a high threat, right? And try to catch any type of attacks that fall through their ability to stop it on their own. So that's another alternative. But I think Stu's absolutely right. You have the policy that you have to get on board. Being the human firewall is part of your job, and if somebody just can't get it and does, you have to have some sort of process in place. But of course, positive reinforcement I think is the way to go. I don't believe in using the stick approach
Right.
at all. That doesn't work.
I've heard that
Yeah.
from some people that's the only way to do it. I was
No,
just curious
no,
if you agree,
that's old
disagree.
style.
It's the old style.
Yeah,
Be like
that's
a
all
helpful
style.
friend.
Helpful friend. Yeah, I like that
Yes.
much better.
Learning moment,
Teachable
Oh,
moment,
okay,
sure.
yeah, I remember now. Let me do that not in the office and also not at the house.
I was just going to say, do you think that this kind of education translates to personal use of your own devices, your
Very
own?
much so.
Because we're all vulnerable, whether or not we're at work.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the key things is getting people to, take this issue to protect their own self-interest, their own security. And I think that's a major thing because when people care about their own bank accounts,
Sure.
credit card accounts, email, and this sort of thing.
Cell phone,
then-
SIM cards, everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Then they start to take this seriously, and then they obviously, hopefully, will change behavior at the workplace as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
What kind of technologies would you tell just the general population as well as the C-suite to pay attention to in 2019 and 2020 that are getting developed both for security purposes, but also, anything that could be a new vulnerability? I mean, we hear about, your household smart home devices getting hacked or, breached, or people spying on you, or your Facebook data. But what are the technologies that you would really focus on? We can go to Kevin first, since you have your finger on the pulse of the industry.
Well, there's so much. I mean, like you said, you have the social networks, you have the IoT devices people bring into their house, whether it's an interconnected refrigerator, that sort of thing. But the basic things people need to do is have good password hygiene. And to do that, use a password manager. You don't use your brain because your brain can't remember 100 unique passwords for 100 different websites out there.
So not a Post-it note.
Not a Post-it note, not choosing the name of the site and some word that you think is going to be clever that nobody's
Right.
going to figure out. And then, of course, two-factor authentication. There's lots of sites now that offer multi-factor authentication. People should turn that on by default, because even though a hacker could use phishing to bypass certain types of two-factor authentication, you should still turn it on anyway. And of course,
Better
whenever,
safe than sorry, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It should be the default. And last is whenever you're traveling or using open wireless at the local coffee shop, at the airport lounge, use VPN. And you could set it up where just when you connect to an open wireless network, it just does it automatically.
Sure.
So I think these simple steps, including being trained on the recent threats, and we have a home training course.
Okay.
That's absolutely free. I encourage people to take a look at this training course because it'll help them become aware of what threats out there could affect them.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see mainstream media covering this as much as possible until it's like someone has been hurt by a breach. But Stu, what would you say you're seeing as far as new technologies as far as keeping both your customers safe in the next few years?
Well, artificial intelligence / machine learning / deep learning is certainly a technology that you're going to find is going to help as another layer of defense, because that's what we're really talking about, which can identify anomalous behavior in a network, or can look at what a baseline employee behavior is, and if something subtly is very different.
Very different, maybe they've been compromised. Sure.
Yeah, AI can then at least raise a red flag and say, hey, and we are building similar things ourselves.
That's super interesting, yeah.
Plus, we have technology at KnowBe4. One of our products is called Second Chance. So if if we spot something through the technology, through a software agent running on that workstation of the user, and we spot that the user is likely going to authorize a phishing attack because that person is not trained well enough to catch it, we'll actually give them a second chance. So we'll pop up a dialog box that says, are you sure you want to open up that attachment?
That's right.
Are you sure you want to click that link? And
maybe some
giving
bells
them
will
that
go
second
off.
chance. We leave it up to the human user. If they go ahead and say, second chance, I don't care, and they get infected or they get ransomware,
No good.
that's no good. But you're absolutely right. But at least we give them that opportunity.
So I hear a lot about playing defense, putting these protections in place, educating the end user, the last level of defense, telling my grandma to help with her password protection. Kevin, isn't it tempting to find out who's doing this and who the actor is and who the bad guy is and going after them on the offense?
It's tough. Attribution is tough these days because you got more sophisticated threat actors that could use VPN. You can go buy an anonymous wireless hotspot in any of the mobile operators these days and just sit somewhere at a restaurant and hack and toss it in the trash. There's so many ways people could cloak their identity. We have Tor for anonymity. In fact, I wrote a book on this called Art of Invisibility, not for, so criminals could evade law enforcement. It was more for the everyday person of not being spied upon or not having their privacy violated. And so with respect to these threat actors that use these techniques, it's really important for people to really know the scam. Once they know how they're going to be victimized, they have the capability to help mitigate that risk by changing their behavior. Password manager, multi-factor authentication, using a VPN, being trained, that sort of thing.
These are the tools that we have in place, so we might as well use them. But Stu, what do you think?
And hacking back is illegal.
It's illegal.
So you
Not allowed.
shouldn't do it, you can't do it, because it's very, very hard to truly know who did this. Because they can hide behind 15 hops.
Sure.
And they make it look like it's the Russians, but it's the Chinese and the other way around. So,
Could be, yeah.
So the challenge that we're facing, if you again look at the defense side of things, the defender needs to be right 100% of the time. An attacker only needs to be right once.
Sure.
So
It's a numbers game.
playing defense
Yeah.
is a tougher job than being an attacker. And so we're trying to help everyone to keep their networks as safe as possible with this additional human firewall layer, which is another safeguard against the
last
bad
line of
guys
defense.
coming in.
Yeah.
Layer 8.
Layer 8, last line of defense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we're doing assessments, like from the offensive side, with permission, of course, of the client, we're doing phishing attacks, which are what they call credential harvesting. What does that mean? That means tricking the individual into providing their username and password. So it might look like their Office 365 login, but it's really fake. It's the attacker's website and they're putting in their credentials. And then you have attacks that run what we call payloads, which is malicious software. So when the victim clicks on the link, it might exploit a software flaw in their browser, for example. Or they might open up an attachment and click enable content, which enables a macro to run.
Yeah.
Right? And that macro could execute commands on their computer and take control.
And you
So
might not
there's-
even know it.
Yeah, so it's really
That's
good, to educate people. For example, you might have finance that they're used to receiving email that contain spreadsheets that have macros. That's normal. And they might not realize, hey, when I click the enable content button, that could potentially be dangerous. So what we do at KnowBe4 is we actually train people like finance, for example,
Sure.
that clicking enable content is a very dangerous action that could compromise them. So they need to have a process in place to verify that that's a legitimate email.
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically, don't open an attachment you didn't ask for, which is an interesting discipline.
Yeah. So Stu, before we wrap up, tell me a little bit about what it's like to work with KnowBe4. I mean, I'm a customer of yours. What are the training modules like? What are the videos like? What are the phishing simulations like?
Let me throw some numbers at you. We have 3,000 phishing templates that you can choose from. There's well over 800 different training modules, varying from videos to games to interactive to posters to whatever. We have basically it's a tool called Automatic Security Awareness Program. It's called ASAP. You fill out 15 questions and out comes a fully dedicated custom awareness
Customized
program
program?
for you. And then you just go through those steps and do it.
It's like Match.com, but for security awareness training.
I like that concept. Yes. So
Good analogy.
that's we get about 1,000 new customers a month.
That's
So-
great. That's
so
great.
it's a well-oiled machine.
It's important too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the number one thing is everybody across the globe is worried about ransomware. And
It's a big one.
the number one way the threat actors are deploying ransomware
Phishing.
is phishing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now they're going, wow, how do we stop this phishing? So they're looking at the human element, us, layer 8. They're looking at what technologies they can put in place. And just as Stu said earlier, layering those defenses so it mitigates risk.
Yep.
You could be one person in the mailroom who opens up the wrong phishing scam, and then the CEO of a Fortune 100 company is
Shuts
very
down.
upset on the news
Yes.
with the ransomware attack.
And don't forget, a lot of the C-suite, they might not think it's necessary for them to be security aware because their position doesn't require it. They're not dealing with IT, but their threat actors, of course, are going to target the C-suite. Chief financial officer, the chief executive officer, to do CEO fraud, because that's one of the biggest scams going out there now, is convincing.
If I get a boss from the CEO,
Yeah.
I'm going to open it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
If you get an order from the CEO,
Sure.
send this wire to
I'm
this,
probably
to
not
this
gonna,
vendor.
Right. Second
that
guess
they-
it.
Yeah.
Sure.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. Really interesting stuff. It was nice to talk to you, Stu and Kevin.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.